And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics One. Welcome to Politics 101. I'm David Hanks. Today is a special day for Guyana. It's the anniversary of our republic. I'm refraining from saying Happy Republic because I don't think there's anything to be happy about this republic anniversary, and given what has gone down in the last day or two in relation to the national observances, and my own assessment of where we've been as a republic these last 52 years does not lead me to celebrate. But we observe 52 years of Republican status, and the significant milestone, because when we became a republic 52 years ago, it was a daring move on the part of the leaders at that time to make a clean constitutional break with our former colonial masters, to make a clean break with the monarchy. Not many post-colonial countries of that time, post-World War II, post-colonial countries, not many had the courage to make a step in the direction of a republic. None of our Anglophone Caribbean brothers and sisters at that time, 4 of them had become independent: Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago. None of them made a move in that direction. Later, Dominica would be singular in that regard. In fact, when Dominica became independent, it moved towards Republican status almost immediately. It was a very important move. We were signaling that we were making a clean break with the colonizers. We were signaling that we're about to create a new nation. We were up against challenges because we were becoming a republic at a time and in a world that was not created for us. The New World Order that was created at the end of the Second World War by the victors of that war was a world order to fortify Europe and the First World and to ensure that they did not go to war again. The Washington Consensus gave rise to the IMF, the World Bank, what would become the WTO, the United Nations, and those institutions were all created for the First World. The United Nations, despite independent countries becoming members, it was controlled and still is controlled by 5 superpowers with veto powers. The IMF was created to integrate the world finances and to provide loans for big countries. The World Bank was created to rebuild Europe. And the World Trade Organization was to control trade, to control trade. And then we had the intervention of the Cold War, which created a parallel to the Washington Consensus. And they had their own Eastern global mechanism. And so our Caribbean countries, Guyana inclusive, became independent in the 1960s in that hostile world. It was not a world that was created to turn former plantations into nations. And that's what Guyana was. It was a plantation. And we were challenged at independence to turn a plantation into a nation, a hell of a task. To this day, we have not, in my estimation, even gone a quarter of a way in transforming our former plantation into a nation. We were saddled with the ethnic problem. We came into independence as a hostile ethnic society. Europeans came here and attempted to take away, in fact, took away Native American lands. They were here. They brought Africans against their will in chains. They enlisted European Amerindians to be slave police to capture runaway slaves. Later on, after emancipation, they brought our East Indian, Portuguese, and Chinese brothers and sisters here as indentured laborers. What they in fact were, they were reparations for the slave masters who had the audacity to tell the British that they need to compensate them for ending slavery, and indentureship was compensation for the slave masters. And those who came as indentured laborers were fed the lie that Africans had abandoned the plantation and lazy and all of that stuff. Our ethnic groups were so in conflict. And despite instances of solidarity and unity along the way, by the time we got to independence and so forth, the conflict came to the surface. So we were challenged to weave together a nation out of peoples in conflict. Kind of a challenge. Ours was a cooperative republic using the cooperative instinct, the cooperative culture as the driving force behind economic liberation in a world that was hostile to anything that was cooperative. Capitalism, global capitalism, philosophically was grounded in the notion that all men, all human beings were not created equal. And so we could not have an economic system that was in equality. And that capitalism says that we go into the market and the market decided the allocation of resources. If one believes that all human beings are created equal, then what flows from that philosophy is an economic system that is consistent with that thought. If you believe that all human beings were not created equally, then you create an economic system to reflect that. And ours was a cooperative republic which assumed that all of us were created equally and that human beings by our very nature will pool our thoughts and our resources together to create a nation. So we were talking about cooperatives in a conflictual local situation, and we're talking about cooperatives in a global system that was anti-cooperative. Those were challenges at in 1970 as we became a republic, moving away from the monarchy, cutting all ties. 52 years later, here we are. And I'm arguing that our republic has been plagued by two major factors. It has been plagued by our ethnic baggage that we brought from colonization. And it has been plagued by external intervention in our politics. The two, when you put them together, they account for where Guyana is today. 52 years after we made that bold step, we still have to tangle with unemployment that is, depending on which economist you talk to, is either 40-something% or 30-something%. We brought that from colonization, and 52 years later, we're still staring that fundamental consequence as we look at our republic. 1953, the US Secretary of State told his counterpart in England, the United Kingdom, that Guyana could become communist and the British needed to do something. The British intervened. They overthrew the government in their own colony with guns, suspended the constitution. That then led to a split in the national movement along ethnic lines. 1964, the early 1960s, the British and the Americans would intervene again, this time from an ideological standpoint, arguing that the PPP, which was in power at the time, was communist, and that was inconsistent with the worldview of the West. And so the PNC and the UF were inserted in office. We come to 2020. The British and Americans would intervene again, this time for economic reasons. We found oil, Western investment in the oil. Which of the two major parties would best accommodate Western control of the oil? They decided the PPP would. And as they did in 1964, they inserted the PPP in office. All the niceties about democracy and so forth. After 2 years, we ought to stop that nonsense. They inserted them in power. And there's a way you can do that. You can use democratic elections to insert governments that you want or regime change. So 52 years, we're talking about an ethnicity, an ethnic problem that has gotten worse. We're talking about external intervention that has been permanent. Any assessment of our republic has to begin there, or else we are wasting time, fooling ourselves. And we in Guyana have a healthy appetite for fooling ourselves. As we come to this Republic celebration or observance, depending on who you talk to, as we come to the 52 years anniversary, there have been some developments. One, we had a development that we are calling Mr. Sue, where an American journalist came to Guyana and basically opened publicly for us to see and to hear that our leaders are corrupt. No, we didn't need an American journalist to come and tell us that. We knew We always know that. But an American journalist came and got one of the most powerful leaders in the country in a tangle. 2 days later, 3 days later, the Americans released a report from USAID. Last night, the American president made a statement. When you take those three things together, it is reflecting the external intervention that I'm talking about. An American journalist came to tell us that there is corruption in high places. We always knew that. The USAID put out a statement that, among other things, say we got to live together and we have to govern together, called power sharing. They say we have to have a national development strategy. They say we have to have inclusive governance. They say that we have to have cash transfers. We knew that. We proposed those things over the years. We've been talking about power sharing since 1961. We've been talking about cash transfer for the last 5 years. We actually did a national development strategy 30 years ago that was never implemented. But here is America telling us what we need to do to survive as a nation. We knew that. We know that we have to do these things. But the fact that we play games with these things and the Americans have to tell us 52 years later is very instructive. Power sharing is quite interesting. You talk to Indo-Guyanese supporters of the PPP, they say we are against power sharing. You talk to black supporters of the PNC, they say we don't know what it means. Both groups are being dishonest. Black people know what it means. It's a black man who first proposed it in 1961. The PNC came out for it in 2002, the WPA in 79, the PPP in 77. They know what it means. But you talk from journalist to leader to them. What is power sharing? What are you all talking about? It can't work. And the other side, they're not saying they don't know what it means. They're saying that we don't have trust, so we don't want it because you all don't trust me and we don't trust you all, so we don't want it. The other side is laughing at the side outside who say that they don't know what it means. Our republic has been about lying to ourselves to satisfy party politics. No wonder last night, what did we do? Our young people, after they finished raising the flag by themselves, because they never invited the opposition, Kathy Hughes had to let us know that. Imagine that. Republic anniversary, and the group that represents politically half of the nation, not there. No wonder when they finished with the nonsense there, our young people went stink and dirty. They went to the thing. Who decided that the way we are going to celebrate our republic is stink and dirty? Who decided that? The government, the Ministry of Culture, name is on the logo. Dirty and stink or stink and dirty, I don't know which one. Don't tell me about celebrating nothing. We are in bad shape. As a nation, we are in terrible shape. And the sooner we recognize that, the better it could be for us. So tonight, we want to talk about this USAID report, because that report is instructive. And we put together a panel of the parties. in the opposition. The other party had no time for us, got no time for us. They think we wicked, stink and dirty. We got the PNC here, we got the AFC, and we got the WPA. You know, you all PNC people like ask, is what the AFC and the WPA bring into the table? And you know what I like tell you all, there's no goddamn table. The people here alone at the table. I am saying here that these three parties represent opposition outlook. They may be in the same individual. The same individual may like some things about the PNC. That same individual may like some things about the FC, and that same individual may like something about the WPA. I think I understand Guyanese. And certainly those who voted for the opposition. Dr. Hines, Norton is a good man, but he got to come out for the cash transfers. But he also got to recognize that the AFC got to bring Indian vote. That's one woman or man that stopped me to talk, reflecting the three views. Yet the dishonesty and disingenuousness of our party people always ask that nonsensical question. Because they don't understand their own people. They think that our people are literally party hats who cannot think beyond party, and sometimes we give them that impression. No, we're going to be discussing the USAID, not because I think the Americans have the answer to our problems. I don't think so, never thought so. But given the role the Americans played 2 years ago, given the role the Americans played 2 years ago, and they had to have known 2 years ago that we need power sharing. They had to have known 2 years ago that cash transfers is a good thing. They had to have known 2 years ago that we needed a national development strategy. But 2 years ago, they took care of their interest. And at that point, their interest was to get the PPP in office. What has happened in those 2 years? I think the big countries make the mistake they've made all over the world. They take a position today without thinking about the consequences internally. They know what the consequences are for them externally. But internally, they really don't care. They could not care in 2020. What they were doing was going to lead to one of the most vicious governments in the entire English-speaking Caribbean. They did not care in 2020 that they were installing a government that would not even invite the opposition to the flag raising for the Republic anniversary. They did not know or did not care that they were installing a government that would raid the National Resource Fund, which they advise us to take real money and hide it far, because all you can spend it properly. And they didn't care that they were installing a government that was going to disregard everything, disregard everybody, and go find it. But the Americans and the British are moving not to protect our interests, to protect their interests. You see, the PPP saying, if you all take me out, you all got to deal with the PNC and the AFC and the WP, you know they're nationalists. They're gonna want to renegotiate that contract. They're gonna be talking about Guyanese nationalism. They're gonna be talking about slavery and all those stuff. So you all don't want to, you all gotta deal with them. And so in such a situation, the PPP feels free. We're gonna play with China. We know you all don't like we play with China, but knock me out now. Put me out the powers. Look what you all got to deal with. So they play with China, and the Americans send the journalists to skin them up. The Americans, they walk in mysterious ways, you know. And furthermore, the people, look what's going on. You got 3 countries, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela are supporting the Russians and the story there in Ukraine. And Orphan Ali said, look, I'm inviting the Cuban leader to come here to Guyana. The Americans won't like that, but again, the PPP is telling them, well, you all put me in office. We allow you all to do what you all want out there with the oil. We allow you all to mess up with fishermen them from the cash. We allow you all to flare. We didn't renegotiate the contract. Give me the space to do what we want internally. So the Americans say, well, no, you all got to be inclusive. You all got to share the oil wealth. You don't tell people to share if they're already sharing. The assumption is that they're not sharing. That's what the USAID thing say. That's what Biden said in his message. So what we are seeing here, I think, is American foreign policy clashing with the unintended consequences of that policy. I don't think the Americans are about to let go of the PPP. That's not how they work. But they're signaling to the PPP that they are unhappy with what the PPP is doing to them, not to we in Guyana. And they're using our clarion calls, power sharing, cash transfer, sharing the wealth. They're using the opposition that they kicked out of office. They're using their playbook. It therefore raises the question, why is our opposition not using our playbook more effectively? Why over the last 2 years we not been talking about power sharing or cash transfers or a national development strategy? That's why I brought the parties here tonight, to talk for themselves, on these developments. Some of us have been shouting for the last 2 years that there was regime change. Our leaders have been playing down the regime change. Don't talk about it. They know it's regime change, but they want to get back in office. And if you want to get back in office, you don't always tell the truth. But while you're waiting to get back in office to wield power, you're taking blows outside. And my study of politics tells me that you don't have to wait to be in office to wield power. You have power right now. It's not governmental power, but you have power of half of the nation. Anyhow, that long introduction is really to set the stage for our discussion tonight. Let me bring our guest in, Cassie Hughes from the AFC, no stranger to Politics 101, young Elson Lowe from the PNC, and Takumo Gonse from the Worst Possible Alternative. because that's what the Americans used to, Burnham used to tell the Americans. If you move me, you got to deal with the PPP. And even if you get past the PPP, them radical ones that call themselves WPA is the worst possible alternative. History repeating itself. The PPP already saying, remove us and you got to deal with Sharon Brown, the worst possible alternative. Sharon Duncan, sorry. And them responding on the social media. Same story, same language. But then everybody. And
Good
so
night. Good night.
you
Good
Good
night.
night.
representing the big
Good night.
party. So you got open the button, right? Because you are getting more seats in parliament for the coalition. You are the big party. What
Mhm.
do you make of the report uh, from the USAID, followed by the statement from the President of the United States of America?
Yes, I actually think that some of this context was established when we heard Ambassador Lynch mention corruption and mentioned poor governance, and so I think all of that has to be included. Essentially, though, what I'd start off by saying is I'm glad to see a statement coming out by the USAID, and indeed by President Biden, which is frank, which is clear, and which is, I think, quite honest about the challenges that we face in Guyana in bringing about inclusive development. I think that it's good that we're starting from that standpoint, and as a result, the report is in many ways, I think, quite refreshing and adds a lot of directness to the conversation. I think that them being as specific as calling out the distribution of COVID-19 relief, part of that would have been the cash grant relief, and inequities regarding that relief was again very refreshing because it is something that we've been speaking about quite a bit over the course of the last year or so, as we continue to await this Auditor General report as to the distribution of the cash grants. I don't know when that report will arrive, but we continue to await it. So I thought that from that perspective, it was good to see a fresh take. But I think what it really highlighted is that we are seeing some serious um, divides being exacerbated and amplified across the country. We're seeing resources and resource allocation follow these divides, and we're seeing that Guyana's institutions are too weak to properly address these divides. And so I think that is why this USAID report is calling for things like power sharing, is bringing up specific inequities, and is quite frank. One of the it's important also to remember that oil. I always say oil is a funny thing, and as a funny thing, I think oil can have all sorts of unintended consequences. And one of the unintended consequences of us having all of this growth and this potential prosperity is that it has raised the stakes of elections, it has raised the stakes of governance, and it has really put, actors who may have been okay with, more moderate policies, has made them more hardline because now there's more on the line. There's more to gain from the situation. There's millions and millions on the line, whereas before it was nothing like that. And so, unfortunately, I think that you're seeing this play out in resource distribution over the past few years by the PVP. You're seeing this play out in the way that they're dealing with the opposition and dealing with include the idea of inclusive governance and things like meaningful consultation. That word meaningful. It seems to me that there's a bit of a struggle with it in the PvP because, as much as Guyana's constitution calls for that, when you look at something as big as the Natural Resources Fund Act, which is, probably one of the most important pieces of legislation that we will ever have in this country, the consultation was non-existent. And so that, I think, is at the heart of what is going on. It is unfortunately, a deliberate effort to exclude, half of the population because the stakes are much higher. and the institutions that exist are not strong enough to properly produce compromise. Now, that says to me that there needs to be institutional reform and that we need to try and produce a healthier form of politics in the country, and that we have serious national development questions to be answered. That's what I think of it. As far as power sharing goes, I'm sure
We'll come back to that
the
later on, and we'll
right,
come
we
back to
can
your
discuss that in some detail.
in some detail, and we'll come back to your thing about about strong institutions as a political, um, I don't want to say scientist because the two don't go together often, but as a political student, I think institutions in countries like ours solve nothing. You can create strong institutions. A strong man take those institutions and work them in a strong way. That's it. I have my reservations of institutions because we have institutions, but we have institutions that are not suited to our political environment. But I mean,
Well, we can
you're a bright
we can
young
chat
man.
about
I'm
that.
coming back to you. I mean, you got to come in at no, number three because you party that was 6 or 7 seats, so you're a big party. Am I overdoing the significance of the USAID statement and President Biden's statement?
No, I definitely don't think that you are. It is very telling. And if we consider that we're not yet into 2 years of a PPP administration, then you can understand how drastically they have removed from the pathway that I would think the Americans at least thought they might travel. And there, of course, we're talking about being a little more inclusive and at least showing some charade of being interested in truly building a one Guyana, as they keep saying recently. The fact that President Biden and, of course, the U.S. ambassador has made those statements, and we see several organizations talking about inclusivity. One of the things that came out from the same oil and gas conference that they organized, that they chose all the speakers for, one of the main messages that came out from the visitors, including the Prime Minister of Barbados and, of course, the President of Ghana, was the need to ensure that all the resources are shared amongst all Guyanese. Um, I love having Elson on this show just because we need to hear the youth and their encouragement and hope. Because the problem you and I have, David, and of course we heard it in your extended introduction, is that we've seen and we've heard some of this stuff for the last maybe 40 to 50 years. And one of the things I know you mentioned the importance of, or you highlighted the interference as one of the key issues, the foreign interference into the internal affairs, and of course our recent 2020 elections. And you also mentioned the challenge of race. What I thought you would also have included, which I think is fundamental to our problems, is the politics of Guyana. We have institutions, but in reality, our institutions are not allowed to shape to meet the needs of Guyana. And most importantly, they're not allowed to be independent. So if you look across the spectrum of institutions we have, starting with GCOM, going right across the range, our modus operandi is always to make them as political as possible. So when everywhere else in the world has an independent elections mechanism and authority, in Ghana we have one that's driven by politics. And so to me, we keep making the fundamental mistakes, and yet 52 years later, we're saying the same things and we're hoping that it's going to turn out differently when we've done absolutely nothing that's different. And we know from the experiences of 2011 to 2015 to 2020 to where we are now that regardless of which party is in power, we have some fundamental challenges that we must deal with as a nation. But what we saw yesterday and you referred to my post on Facebook about not being invited. And trust me, the principle I'm saying is that you cannot hold an event at the Parliament of Guyana, which is a national symbol, a national institution that should reflect independence, and you have our ground desecrated. Because what it meant is that a political party chose to have a political function on the lawns of the parliament, and not even to invite the clerk of the National Assembly, not even to invite the members of that same parliament, is low. It shows that you have no decorum, you have no decency. And that's why I said, if that's what they were going to do next time, and they should have done it last night at Baboujan or any other location, have it on the lawns of Freedom House, not at the Parliament. So there are lots of things that we need to look at. There's no mechanism for us to begin to even talk as civil society, as political parties, as Guyanese. There's no mechanism for us to even start to talk to work out our challenges.
To work out our challenges. Takumo Ogunse, your party was part of the grand confrontation between reformists and revolutionaries in the 1970s and the 1980s, raising the question what our independence would be, what our republic would be, what would be the content, what would be the tenor. And your party was part of, is part of that strand in our politics that says that you have to make a fundamental revolutionary change from what was there before. Fast forward, as we look at what has played out in the last 2 years, and this USAID statement and the President Biden's statement yesterday, are you surprised at these developments?
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I want to say that I haven't heard the President of the United States statement, or I have a chance to read it. But from listening to you, I think I have a sense of what he actually said or indicate. I think the USAID report is very important because, in my view, and I think the WPA's view, it represents an evolution in the United States thinking about the situation in Guyana at present, and a reflection about what the future of Guyana holds in the context of the oil wealth and the strategic position that Guyana now finds itself in relation to this very strategic resource. And I believe that there are a number of issues raised in the report, all of which I think are important. But the major one, in our view in the WPA, is the fact that the report directly addressed the question of shared governance. And we in the WPA have been pushing and fighting for that for more than 2 decades. And as a WPA person in WPA leadership, I feel that the party vision and farsightedness has been confirmed in this new position being taken by the United States. And though I agree with you, the Americans are for their own interests, we in the WPA had raised this matter in the interest of the nation. It was our genuine assessment of Guyana and the possibilities in the context of our history of slavery, indenture, and colonialism. And we felt that this country, even though it is blessed with significant resources, have failed to make good use of these resources economically. And we had reached a point where Guyana was one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere, probably only second to Haiti. And of course, Haiti have millions of people. We barely fighting with about 700,000 people in the context of tremendous resource. And we in the WPA came to the conclusion one of the major obstacles to Guyanese economic and social progress was our political gridlock. And this political of that is the racial competitiveness between the racial groups, and particularly the two largest groups, the Africans and the Indians. And it is around those two groups pushes the political momentum internally in the country. But we also had recognized that Guyanese political dynamics was never solely an internal project. It has always been influenced in a major way by external forces, from slavery to the present. So today, when we see a major external force who from 1960s has constantly exercised influence in the domestic equation, at this historical point in time, seems to have made a major reassessment of their foreign policy towards of that, and to give meaning to that.
Yeah, we seem to be
There's
having
a
some
coincidence
bandwidth
of
problem
interest
there.
here, which may not last forever.
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
think that, I'm saying there's a coincidence of interest at this present moment. There was a divergency between our internal interests and the Trump administration. I think with the coming to power of no coincidence of interest, and we have to play this to our advantage and to the advantage of the country. So even though the initiative may be driven by U.S. interests, we got to convert it into national interest.
We have to convert it into national interest. Elson Lowe, let me bring you in on the first big point made in the report, and that is that we have to move away from the winner take all mentality to a power sharing arrangement. What do you understand that mean? How your party sees the whole issue of power sharing? Where do you stand on it? I know in 2002, the PNC came out at their Congress and said power sharing is an idea whose time has come. The coalition ran on power sharing in 2011 and again in 2015 with the broader coalition. Got into power, did not advance it as an urgent item. Where do you all stand on power sharing? Are the Americans right in saying that power sharing is the way?
I think that the PNC will be happy to listen to conversations on power sharing and have deliberations internally as to what the best path forward is. But that is something that I think would have to be discussed in some depth within the party. I can tell you though that I think that it's very understandable why people would think that power sharing is an important solution. I think it's understandable given the way that the USAID report contextualized the circumstances. It's very understandable that they would say that power sharing is a good mechanism in order to promote inclusivity and so on. However, there are a couple of important questions that I think are always going to be key to ask in any political arrangement. And the first is, of course, um, what specific reason is there to think that power sharing will result in less corruption and mismanagement? The important thing to always keep in mind in politics is that politicians, as they are human beings, are subject to greed and are subject to temptation. And of course, it is always important. This is really the role of institutions to restrain greed and temptation. And in fact, I can point to an example in Venezuela's history where there was power sharing between their major parties, which led to a prolonged period of corruption, which actually is one of the reasons that the Chavez regime was able to get so much power, because there was a substantial rebellion amongst ordinary people who did not benefit. And so, as much as I understand the sentiment towards power sharing, and I think there needs to be serious discussion around how we move forward, I ultimately think that it is not a reasonable position to take to think that Guyana's politicians, no matter the party, are altogether trustworthy. I think that all of us are subject to temptation, and I think that the strongest institutions possible will help to ensure that that instinct towards temptation is mitigated. And one of the things I think is often not well understood in Guyana is that the purpose of democracy, as much as it is to empower the average citizen, it is also wholly to restrain the ambitions of people who would want to make use of the power of the state. And that is really the legacy that democracy came out of. That is really the history of democracy. And one of the things that I think is really important to note is that even in the US now, which has an established democratic system for a very prolonged period of time, hundreds of years, it is pretty difficult to pass a law. It's pretty difficult. And what I think is important to note is it is difficult for a reason. I think that we have a system here where you could pass all manner of absurdity in a very short space of time because there aren't realistic checks and balances. So as much as I think that we want to say, oh, we have institutions and so on, I don't hold those institutions in high regard in terms of their robustness, because it is far too easy for those institutions to be misused. And I think their fundamental purpose really is to ensure that they are not that power is not misused in the country.
And so let me push you before I bring in Kathy here. When you read that report, I don't think they're proposing power sharing to stop corruption. They're proposing power sharing to deal with the fundamental question of the ethnic and social distribution of oil resources. And I think sometimes we begin to deal with power sharing in its structural manifestation rather than its organic political. Power sharing in Guyana has not always been about institutions. It has always been about our racial and ethnic cleavages.
Let me be more
kind of governance system.
Let me be very.
So I want you to address that.
I'll be very specific.
Yes.
What is to stop elites from both races, once they are in a power sharing agreement, from ensuring that they and those close to them are the beneficiaries as opposed to the broader population? That is the ultimate problem.
Yeah, but I don't know what will stop them. You don't know what will stop them. What we do know is that half of the population on the power sharing will not feel they're outside, will not be beat up by the next side, will not be taken advantage by the next side.
It could be that the poor half feels that it is beaten out and the wealthy half feels that it is doing quite well. Which half?
African Guyanese, Indian Guyanese, those are the two halves I'm talking about. Amerindian Guyanese. I'm talking about ethnicity, race, as a black person, as a black man, as a proud black man. I am angry that black people who have slaved for our country, who have given their blood, cannot share in the oil wealth.
And you should be, and you should be.
And so therefore, any system that brings them at the table to decide whether sugar workers get 750,000 and whether public servants get 2%, they're at the table to make that decision. We can talk about structural problems later. I want that money that is coming from the oil well for my people to also have a share of it. But I'll come back to you with that. Let's go to Cassie.
I want to make two very important observations.
Yeah.
I know that you have invited me as a representative of the Alliance for Change.
Yes.
I think everybody knows that the Alliance for Change has been very strong on constitutional reform. And that's actually one of the areas that is just mentioned kind of on the outskirts in this report. And when they look and actually list some of the solutions that we could start moving forward with, it's very, very funny that you don't see constitutional reform identified in those clear terms. Now, we talk about honesty. We talk about a big party and a small party. And this is where I'm going to be devil's advocate and put the truth on the table. Whether you like it or not, David, neither the PNC nor the PPP are interested, I feel, in power sharing.
Mm-hmm.
We have enough proof that once they have the opportunity to be in government, they are convinced that the system works in their favor. And that's why we have seen little or no progress in evolving a concept of power sharing that would make it equitable for all citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why poor Ogunse and the smaller parties, Ogunse, of course, I have extreme respect for. The WPA has been fighting this battle long before the AFC came into being. But we see that, I feel, because we are small, we don't really, we don't really have much strength in this thing. Y'all could talk, do your little workshops and your little thing over 20, 40 years, but y'all is by the side. People forget the power that we did exercise in 2011, and the AFC has to get back to that kind of thing. But what I'm saying is that the major problem we have is I don't think the two giants that dominate the politics, that if you go to an election, are guaranteed a fairly large portion of the vote. They're not interested in power sharing. And that's why in the last, in the 2015 to 2020 term, the AFC within the coalition spoke out on many occasions. Poor former Prime Minister Moses Nagamutu tried to push it and push it and push it and did not get the support. We need to be honest and put that on the line. Now, I want to go to this report and make another comment. And to effectively understand the comment, I want to briefly just read a line from the report. APNU AFC need to find a way to form a functioning democracy based on power sharing rather than winner takes all mentality. And the next line is the most important line. This would ensure that the unprecedented wealth from the oil reserves can be transparently and equitably managed for the benefit of all Guyanese. So again, if I was going to be very cynical, very similar to how you sounded in the beginning of this conversation, but we both have a little more age, it would appear to me that there's not a genuine interest in dealing with some of the structural problems that we have in Guyana, which are identified in the report.
Yeah.
A media that is dominated by Indian business in terms of ownership, a large propensity for decisions under the current administration to favor those who are already in a position of having access to capital, having access through their businesses to be able to take advantage of all the opportunities. We said this a million times in the budget that we just completed, that those with money, those in business, are going to be able to take advantage. We haven't seen large amounts of money put into the GTI, the reforming of our technical institutes. We didn't hear about more assistance to UG. We didn't hear of a program to identify and attract all those young men in All Boys Town, in Buxton, in whatever areas they may be, that don't have the skills, that need to be rapidly retrained, that could be trained in ways to meet the demand, whether it is welding at a higher level, whatever it is that our new oil and gas industry would require. So what I'm saying is that we could see the agendas, and only when we Guyanese decide that we got to start fixing our own problems, and the pressure is put to bear on the administration to ensure that you are fair and accountable, because these resources belong to all of us. You get what I'm saying?
Yes, 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 yes. No, I'm with you. Ogunse, let me bring you in here, because what Kathy read there, is Ogunse with us? I don't see him on.
I think he was having some bandwidth problems before.
Yes.
Likely.
Yes. Elson, let me bring you in. You heard Kathy quoting from Ogunse seems to be here. Ogun, are you with us? You're hearing me?
Yes, yes, I'm with you.
You heard
I'm with
Sister
you.
Kathy quoted directly from the report. And the report seems to zero in directly at the race question. And I'm saying that we are driven to this position of power sharing largely because of the inequitable distribution that we have experienced under this PPP to the oil well. You want to comment on that, please?
Before I answer that, I want to just engage the younger brother just for a moment, and I hope he will take it in the spirit to which I'm attempting to do it. I mean, I listen to him very carefully, and it's always refreshing to hear young people, whether you agree with them or not, but to hear what vision they brings. And with all respect, I'm telling him he sounds just like the PNC, the old. I've heard Hoyt and all of them argue the similar arguments he make against power sharing. And I lived long enough to see, right before Hoyt died, he announced, and he shifted his party position to his famous speech at a time for shared governance has arrived. I say this because I think it is important that young leaders in the PNC if they're going to be meaningful, to make a meaningful impact on the political situation, they got to think outside the box. Now, I can't see how corruption, or let me put it this way. I think the lessons of the world in dealing with corruption has demonstrated that you're able to fight corruption more effectively when you have a stable political environment, and when that environment brings into the political equation the masses of the people. At present, our exclusionary democracy and the winner take all exclude ethnic groups, but also exclude the entire population from both sides, which give tremendous advantage to the political elite. Share governance constitutionally, would make it law that whatever happened at the elections, these two major races, and I'm not emphasizing party now because our party are race-based parties. These two major races will exercise the executive authority of the state. And in so doing, you take out a lot of pressure and tension out of the political and social equation. And you create the possibility. I'm not a God to say 100% it will work perfectly, but I am around long enough to know that you will take out a lot of the pressures out of the equation and give the ordinary African, Indian, Amerindian, Portuguese, ordinary people, okay, a chance to reclaim what is rightfully theirs. The country belongs to the masses, the majority of the people, and not to the politicians and the political elite. And I'm saying a renovation based upon sheer governance have the advantage of opening the door for a resolution of ethnic struggles. It has a advantage of bringing people back into the political equation. And once people come back in the political equation, it's going to be harder for the politicians to behave negatively, including corruption. I'm not saying there will be no corruption, but I'm telling you, Africans will fight African corruption and Indians will fight Indian corruption because there is no political deficit in so doing. In the winner-take-all situation, Africans believe if you fight African corruption, you're creating door for the Indians to get power, and vice versa. And we need, if we're really serious about the country, and we have to remember that time is not on our side. This is a small country with less than 1 million people. And economics have its own logic and dynamics. And when this country take off, we're going to attract a lot of migrants. New people going to come into Guyana. And if we don't be careful, within 20 years, we may have more migrants, okay, than local Guyanese. You know, and with one man, one vote, and a democracy that is not fashioned to deal with the historical problems of the ethnic groups, will open the door for foreigners to take the country away from you. That is what we're facing. And I'm saying that, we have to recognize the historical moment, and we have to, as a nation, face our demons fully and give shared governance a chance to work. People are saying it can't work. You can't know it can't work if you don't try it. You got to try something, and if you try it for a period and it didn't work, but then you're quite right now to rethink on it. But what we know is that this winner-take-all system that we had for the last over nearly 6 years ain't working. And what we know, that those persons who have tremendous experience in understanding the logic of oil is telling you, this oil money, you're going to kill one another over it. If you all don't come to some understanding on governance and resource sharing, you are going to slaughter one another. We see it elsewhere in the world, and you can't avoid that. That is what they're telling us. And I believe the way to avoid that is shared governance. I don't know if I answered you the question that he posed to me, because I might have missed it.
No.
Yeah, but no, you answered it in your explanation there. I'm very, very glad you raised that point, because it was the same question that was raised at independence. If you all do not come together and share an independent Guyana, you all will kill one another. Mm-hmm. And we actually killed one another between 61 and 64. Mm-hmm. UC Guyana was visionary enough to recognize that, and in 1961 and say, look, before we go to independence, let's agree to a joint premiership where Dr. Jagan and Mr. Burnham would be co-premiers. We rejected that. We killed each other from 61 to 64. And I think you're right. The big powers are telling us again, if you all don't come together and share this quote unquote power, you are going to kill each other again. Anyhow, young Elson, you want to respond to anything that Kathy and Ogun has said there on the question of power sharing?
Well, I thank them for their contributions, and I would just point out that we've recently had a leadership change within the PNCR. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. So, discussions will be ongoing as to what policies will be going forward. So
Mhm.
I don't want to close the door on anything or to open the door on anything. I think that this is a period where there is change and we will see discussions take place. However, I just want to stress, and I think it is important that we recognize that ultimately, I think that we cannot allow a system, or we must always be aware that there will always be tremendous temptation for elites to make use of whatever system, so
Mhm.
long as it does not have appropriate safeguards. And one of the
Mhm.
things that I do not hear people talk enough about when they talk about power sharing is safeguards so that the ordinary citizen is able to benefit and we do not have an oligopoly emerge. And what I'm
Mhm.
pointing to is that
Mhm.
Venezuelan major parties, in order to keep the communists out of office,
Yeah.
engaged in power sharing, which resulted not in the benefit of many average people, and resulted in very violent and aggressive class politics. And so what
Mhm.
I'm saying is I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, we must recognize that this system has its own challenges. And if
Mhm.
you want to implement such a system, you must have strategies to face those challenges. It is great to imagine a future where all Guyanese live together and we work together as one through power sharing. And that would be nice. But if we believe that that is going to happen just by the grace of politicians and elites who have the average citizen always at heart, I would love to believe that. But I don't think that any of us is honestly believes that that is always the case. And I would be very cautious about ever believing something like that.
Mhm.
And even as you mentioned Venezuela as an example, I just want to point to you the example just next door to Venezuela in a place called Suriname that had a different outcome. So sometimes we have to cite both the successes and the failures. Don't cite the failure or the
Well,
Catalonia of
the
Ural just
context is
I
an
think,
oil context, though. The context is an oil context. Anyway,
yeah,
Suriname got
I
oil
think
too, oil and ethnicity.
Elson has made some important points, because we do have to ensure that we just don't have a couple of individuals from each of the parties and say that, oh, we're all working together, and they have their own agenda that could put us right back where we are. So
Yeah,
I think that's an important consideration. I think one of the things I wanted to add it, Agunze, of course, so eloquently said his last bit of his last contribution. And what I want to note is that we have to remember that history has also shown us in enough examples all over the world that if you have people that are not allowed to participate, citizens that are not allowed to participate, it's just a matter of time before you get disturbances. I think that would be the politically correct way to put it out there. And therefore, it behoves us to start to discuss how is it that we are going to sit down and start to have this conversation.
yeah,
One of my pet peeves about Guyana is that we know what's not working. We know what we need to do. Tonight we're talking about power sharing. But when we say our last words and we come off of this program, what is the next step? What are the recommendations that are going to come up, and how are we going to get them, and from whom? How are we going to develop that strategy that's going to allow us to have this conversation with people that don't even want to talk, that
yeah,
don't think that they need to talk, you know? So there's some real challenges, and we are running out of time.
yeah,
We are running out of time. We are close. Next year, we will be halfway through, and 12 months after next year, into a campaign mode and another campaign. And I don't think as a people, we can handle not having the change, the rapid transformation of how we do politics in Guyana. It has to take place. If we want to really prevent a total catastrophe, which is where we seem to be going. And I know the president referred to the naysayers. It's not naysaying, just look at history, read a history book. And I'm happy all four of us here on this program are quite united on that point. We know where this could end up. We've seen it, as David said, in the 60s. in 61, right here in Guyana. We grew up hearing our parents and grandparents talking to us about that. So we have some hard work to do.
And Kathy, I'm so glad you raised that. We're all eternal optimists because we have to be, because Guyana is what we have. We may have ties to our motherlands and so forth, but Guyana is our country. And I shudder to think that we would go to another election under the winner-take-all system. And I don't think the country would be able to survive that. No matter who wins,
Yeah.
no matter who wins, if the coalition wins, Indian people are not going to accept a PNC/coalition government. And certainly Africans are not going to accept a second PPP government. We are up against it. And I hear these theoretical arguments about a new approach to governance. But I am saying there is a human element that has to inform our theoretical discussions. And I have always felt that in Guyana we miss the human element because we don't listen to the ordinary lady or the ordinary man or the ordinary boy and girl about how what we talk about affects them on a day-to-day basis. And I think we therefore go off on our theoretical excursions, all right, which a lot of times have absolutely nothing with the survival of ordinary people from day to day. Let's talk about the National Development Strategy, which has come up again. We did one 20 years ago, Kathy, 30 years ago.
Yeah, about 25. Yep.
It was never implemented.
Yeah.
Here are the Americans again saying that we have to have a national development strategy. This time, of course, what is different is we have oil. Ogun is, do we want to go through that again? Even though the first time we went through, it was never used. Should that be a reason for us not to go there again?
No, I don't know. I agree with the Americans that we need a national development strategy. I think it's obvious to all Guyanese in the context of oil. Any thinking Guyanese will know that the previous strategy that we had, a lot of things may be outdated, and with the new resources of oil, would requires renovation. So I think this is unquestionable that we need to have a national development plan or strategy. But the same reason why the last one was not implemented is the same reason would result in us not having a united agreement on any development plan, because the PPP, who had the chance in '92, and subsequently it is under the PPP rule that last strategy was crystallized. Okay, with some external influence from Carter Center and so forth and so forth, and it had fairly widespread participation. I think it's probably the first development strategy that had so much internal participation, and we threw it out of the window. And the reason why the PPP threw it out of the window is clear, because the PPP never believe in it. The PPP have a clear economic plan for domination, okay, as a party, and the various power base in the Indian community have crystallized their ideas on the direction Guyana should go. And I believe that we would not be able to have an effective development plan, even to begin the discourse on it, until we renovate the balance of political forces in the country. There is nothing at present except for the moment, let us exclude the Americans' recent intervention. If you look at the disposition of the internal forces, there is nothing internally that will make the PPP feel that they have to change course. And ultimately, even with the best intent of the Americans, they're not going to send the army here and the children here to reinforce anything for Guyana. The Americans would support us to the extent that there's a significant amount of Guyanese are fighting for shared governance and fighting for a national development strategy and parity and equality and justice in sharing our resources. So for me, the first requirement to get to a national development strategy, you have to win a political compromise on the PPP before, and which has to take place outside the ballot box. The elections is about near 3.5 years, from now. And I think that you can't wait until elections. You have to fight the PPP frontally on some clear national issues. And in this ethnically divided country, and I live in all my life, I haven't lived anywhere else on the globe. And I think I understand our people, and I think I understand our country to some extent. Some one of the ethnic groups, either the African or the Indian group, have to break away from the established political leadership on this question of shared governance and on this question of national unity in a real committed way. We cannot continue to allow these matters to be decided wholly and solely by our historical parties. We have to develop a communal politics. And in this case, I'm speaking for the African community. When I'm speaking to the African community, we have to recognize the strengths and the weaknesses of our party. And we have to recognize, that the party may come and go. But I am assuming that the African community will be here to stay. And if the community is here to stay, then the community interest has to be given priority over party interests. And while the party will want to play games on shared governance, want to play games on national development strategy, and they may not want to invest, a lot of political resources in fighting for those things and prefer to sit and wait until the next elections, we as an African community has to begin a campaign to fight for these things that are reflected in the USAID report, the critical ones. We have to begin to put pressure on our own leadership, first and foremost. Unless the African leadership stop playing games on these matters, that is the only way you're going to narrow the space for maneuver of the PPP. And I am saying that the country will not go to any serious discussion on a national development plan except we alter the balance of forces in the political equation. And we have to do it before the next elections.
Yeah, Kathy, let me bring you in before I go back to Elson, because I remember on this program, shortly after the election, you were quite candid on the experience of the AFC as a small party in the coalition. It's an experiment. We had a coalition with UF and the PNC. That didn't last very long. And certainly the coalition we have had from, I will go back to 2011, to the present, is a different kind of coalition. Obviously, there were advances, but as you and others have pointed out, there were areas that we held down badly in terms of how we managed the coalition. Looking forward, and I think I take Ogun's argument, that while the Americans are looking after their own interests, those interests or what they do cannot be divorced from our internal politics, right? Do you think that parties like yours and the WPA have some role to play in making the ground more hospitable to a politics of national unity?
I definitely, we have a very important role to play. And I think that fortunately, if we use the AFC as an example, we can see from 2005 right through to 2015. And I want to point out that prior from 1992 right through to 2015, the PNC was unable to win an election in Guyana and take government by itself. And I think if we're honest again, we know when we look at the statistics, it's an impossibility. So we have to develop these partnerships. And I think the AFC started off by trying to give a different perspective to the political landscape, as did the WPA. And I think, especially in 2011, when we no longer had a government that had a majority in a parliament, I think history will probably review that period and see that that was one time when we literally could keep a government in check because we had the power to work with the other parties in the parliament. And of course, at that time, it was the PNC and APNU. And we were able to define and determine what, in a more successful manner, what went into the budget. And we could shape legislation in a much better way. So I think we have an important role to play. What I find sad is that some of the bigger parties haven't really changed with time.
Yeah.
And even our partner did not understand the importance of us having to work with each other. So a lot of time was wasted, and continues today to be wasted fighting each other down. And that is why Ogunse is absolutely correct that there's a certain messaging we need to tell our own people and our own parties that we need to reform and we need to see each other in a different light. We are not the enemy. There's one enemy out there right now, and it is certainly not the AFC.
Yeah.
It's the PPP. And how do we deal with that,
Mhm. Elson, let me bring you in here. You're the economist in our midst. And talk to us about the national development strategy. What would you, as a young economist, and I'm now pulling you away from the party for a minute, right? As a young economist, what would you like to see? First of all, philosophically, what would you like to see as the philosophical underpinnings of a strategy? And then policy, what policy areas you would like to see emphasized in such an initiative?
Yeah, thank you. Let me first say that I think a national development strategy really is vital given all of the change that has taken place. And I want to point out something that to your viewers, which might not be obvious, which the MP just pointed out, which is that during that 2011 period or so, where we had that split government, the focus, the power, the strength, the emphasis was on the parliament, and the parliament being able to decide what was going to go into the budget and how things were going to work. I think that parliament is the weakest branch of government in Guyana. And I think that we have it backwards because parliament is supposed to be the strongest branch of government in the country. So I have little respect for Guyana's institutions in their structure. Now, the next thing that I would say is I think that, we are going into a period where if we manage resources well, the country can become incredibly wealthy and our citizens can set themselves up to benefit substantially for this generation and for future generations. But what we need to ask ourselves is what are the things that are required to allow our citizens broadly and also in specific areas to benefit from this? And I think that I am particularly concerned that there has not been an emphasis on education so that people can actually access jobs within the oil and gas sector, but also other higher paying jobs as this economy grows, as money flows into the country, and as we expand. It strikes me that that is a fundamental problem, given that I am confident that more than half of Guyanese did not pass both math and English at CXC. Maybe I don't even know if half of Guyanese wrote CXC. And so their ability to access these higher paying jobs is very limited. And we're going to be relying extremely heavily on a lot of imported labor. And so I think that there is no way to really have an equal and equitable society without us improving access. And we have serious problems with access right now, which are putting us, I think, on the back foot. I think that, and this is something that we're discussing, and I think will continue to be discussed within the PNC and the coalition more broadly, how we can get the average Guyanese, irrespective of your race, to get access to these opportunities and what is the path that we need to go. In terms of policy, what I would say is of immediate and vital necessity, which is something that the Honorable MP also alluded to. We need to get some of these technical schools up to scratch. We need to expand them and we need to equip them so that our people can actually receive the training they need to service the oil and gas economy and to service the other sectors that will be tied to it. From that perspective, I think we also need to see an expansion of the night school programs, not a contraction as we're seeing under the PPP, so that people can get a chance to go back to school who were not able to get the full qualifications that they would have wanted to get, so that those people can now get access. I want to stress again, I am confident. I could be wrong, but from my experience growing up in this country and keeping an eye on math and English pass rates, just as an example, I'm confident more than half of this country does not have both math and English, and that they would find themselves in serious difficulty to get these types of high paying jobs. This is wholly unacceptable. It is huge in scale, and it has a direct impact upon the progress that we'll be able to make as a nation as the money comes in.
Ogunse, from the standpoint of your party, I know you all have in your ranks, you all going to be saying you all. But the WP has in its ranks Professor Clive Thomas, who has been very strong on the question of poverty. I know Elson did not get in to that. Would poverty alleviation from the WPA standpoint be at the center of your conception of what a national development strategy could be? Ogunse, are you?
Yes,
Yeah.
but I want to go even a little further.
Yes.
I think that are you hearing me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, yes. Yes,
I agree with you that the fight again has been and is central in the WPA thinking on any development strategy. But we also go further. As to start with putting in the forefront of that development strategy philosophically, attempt, to correct historical injustices between the various ethnic groups. You see, you could have a country time was one of the richest countries in Africa, but the majority of Africans were excluded and they're poor. Guyana has developed in the colonial relation, but the Amerindians are excluded. They're probably the poorest the ethnic groups. So you could have rapid economic development and also rapid injustice. And during elections, one of the realities that I experienced is that the PNC elements never want to go and say to complete the speech. And I want to complete the speech in Sophia. The point I want to make is that I use a simple example in order to give Guyanese an understanding of what we're facing. And this is paramount for we as an African community. Now, for the sake of argument, let us say that the African and the Amerindians constitute 10% of the economy. That's the stakes they got in the economy. And the Indian community got 40% in the economy. And let we say we share in the oil money 50-50 between the Indian community and the African and the Amerindian community. In the first year, we give half of the oil money to the Indian community. That will carry the 40 to whatever proportion, that reflects. The other half will carry the African Amerindian to something that whatever it reflects in monetary terms. And we continue the second and third year. On that formula, the African Americans can never ever catch up with the Indians. In this equation, given our history and given African sacrifices, the African community, now and in the future, will not accept and believe that Ghana is being fair to them after over 200 odd years of slavery and the exclusion of collective wealth, an economic model that allow one ethnic group become super rich and then we come dragging behind. That is not a model, for African cooperation. And I am saying that the philosophy that should drive economic model for Guyana has to be rooted in the challenge of the indigenous situation in the country. And we have to have economists who could out of the conventional conception of these matters and to bring a kind of indigenous local conception to the economic matters and to realize that the country will go nowhere, if you present to Africans and Amerindians a model which will always keep them at a level of economic development which is far, far removed from that of the Portuguese and the Indian, Europeans, and probably the Chinese. So rooted in whatever refashioning we want to engage, the central of it, if it is to work, it has to, from the beginning, recognize historical injustices and commit itself to correcting those.
Okay. Kathy, as we close off, what would the AFC like to see as being front and center of a national development strategy?
Actually, before I answer that part, I wanted to make a comment on the strategy itself.
Good.
Because I actually spent many hours with several persons involved in the tourism sector, working on the tourism part of the National Development Strategy. And I think we have an excellent opportunity. I'm glad it came up in this discussion because I think it's actually easier than we think it is. There were more than 4,500 Guyanese that worked on that strategy for many, many hours. It's well documented. It's comprehensive. It covers all the sectors. The only sector, of course, would be our new oil and gas industry and any spin-off sectors associated with that. But it is so comprehensive, it covers all the others. And I think maybe in retrospect, if we were trying to be nice and to find an acceptable quote unquote reason why it was not implemented, maybe we could say that the financing to fund each of the sectors and the ideas may not have been there. And therefore, now that we have access to the funds, instead of allocating monies in a haphazard manner, one of the sad things about the budget debates that we just finished, there was $607 million that came from the Natural Resource Fund put into the budget. And up to now, we don't have a specific idea, although we questioned for 4 days and wanted to find out what specific projects are being financed. Where is this $607 million being used in which projects? As opposed to just throwing everything into a consolidated fund and you have a blurred vision of what is what. So what I'm saying is that I think that we have the opportunity to relook at that national development strategy. Realistically, each sector could be given, I don't think they need more than 2 months to update each sector, because for the last 20 years, we all know what the failings are, what the challenges are, and what needs to be done. And therefore, it would be easy to update the national development strategy to the requirements of 2022 to ensure that the funding, that the strategy is funded, each of those sectors. That, in fact, appeases one of the main concerns that we have, which is that all the money, oil monies, will go back into an oil industry, and we would not have expanded and developed our other sectors. And developing those other sectors ensures a wider scope of Guyanese that are already working in those different sectors and industries, whether it is education, whether it's housing, whether it is gold mining, whether it is tourism or whatever, that they have an ability to benefit from the resources in each of those sectors that now could be expanded. When you look at little Barbados, when you look at the Chinese and every other, when you look at Singapore, the advantage that those folks have had is that they have had a strategy that the nation developed and bought into. And regardless of who is in politics, it doesn't change. So we have a vision we want to do for education. It doesn't matter whether it's APNU, AFC, WPA, or PPP. We know that this is where we want to go in education. I think this is absolutely required if we're going to move our country forward. And if you look at the AFC's manifesto of 2011, which would have been the last independent manifesto we did, a lot of these principles are what we have alluded to and discussed tonight that could be tied in so neatly to the national development strategy. We have to get to a stage where all Guyanese feel that they have a part and a stake in this. If not, we will go down the road of South Africa in its very worst days. We will speak, we will talk, but what is the state of the country when we finally decide, let's talk because it ain't working?
Let's talk because it's not working. I noticed in the audience Nigel Hughes, and I remember in 2018, Nigel was in a village that he is given honorary citizenship. And he shared the stage with Professor Clive Thomas, who unveiled the cash transfer proposal. And I remember Nigel being very strong on the ethnic division as an issue. 4 years later, Nigel could say, but I told you also.
Yes, and he would. And he would.
Yeah.
And he would.
It's one of the frustrating things about Guyana. We forget so easily. You know, a lot of what is happening now, we were warned. But the thing is that once we get in that election mode, our world becomes so small. PPP versus PNC. So small. We forget that there is even a country around us, a region around us, the world around, and we become consumed by the rest of the world, and we don't even realize it. Nigel sat on that stage. I was there. I was the moderator, and when they were talking about Dutch disease and so on, he was talking about that ethnic disease.
Yep.
You know, and he says, "Come back."
And one other thing, one of the things, Takuma didn't actually use these words, but he had some very powerful statements in his last contribution. And this is where the other thing we're going to have to start to look at is our version of affirmative action. That is something that, as you know, in many parts of the US, they understood was absolutely necessary. And if we want to build a country that is fair and equitable, then We cannot continue to move forward with the disadvantages some specific groups, especially the African and the Amerindian Guyanese, have had to face historically. It has been just a historical quirk, and they have to be addressed. If we can truly say we're going to set up a system where we can all have and operate on a level playing field, it's impossible to play catch up. And with the resources we have, finally, thanks to the gods above, we can actually start to do something real and catch up and make a more fairer system for us all.
Yes, and in the big capitalist United States,
Yeah.
they're doing reparations at the level of cities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Eric Phillips was on here last night and he was saying he just came back from Illinois, where they're doing reparations in some cities in Illinois, in California, cash transfer. So while the American government at the top may not be dealing with these issues of equitable distribution of wealth, people are taking the initiatives and doing them at the level of the villages and towns. We are a small society. We may not need to go that way. But the point here is that these matters cut across ideology, and they just make sense.
Yep.
They just make sense. Elson Law, your closing thoughts.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the things that I just want to inject into the debate as we close off is that it worries me when we can only see politics between the different races as a winner take all, I get, you don't get, me versus you. When it seems to me to be obvious, and I'm coming from a youth perspective here, that there's things to be gained from cooperation. And this reminds me in many ways of the discussion around bringing women into the workforce and how it was not realized that about half of the workforce of any country was not being fully utilized. And so the country's growth was being retarded and so reduced. And so what I would say is that is exactly what is going on here. We must understand that each and every group has people who are valuable and who can contribute to the future and the growth of the country. It is not a winners take all scenario. It is something where we can work together to produce synergies. And so I want us to maybe have that in our head as we look forward to further discussions, because it is important ultimately when we build this one Guyana, that's this real one Guyana, not this slogan, that we actually look at how we will benefit from working with each other. Because I feel that at its core, when you look at the national motto, when you look at the spirit around independence, that's what it's really all about. It's about how we're going to work together to build this Guyana. So I think that is really vital. I'll close to say, though, that I'm sure that discussions will continue on these topics, and we'll see what the people say regarding it, and we'll see what progress is made. I'm just glad that we got some nice, strong, specific statements from the U.S., from multiple actors.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think it makes a difference. A lot of people are commenting on the young, fresh voice. And I want to throw it out to if young people are in the audience and you all want to come on to a program like this, please contact me. I mean, when I am looking for guests for this show, I can only go by the regulars that I know. But if there are young people who are in university or who are in business, feel that you have something to contribute to these discussions, please contact me. I'm begging, because we need more voices of young people, women in this discussion. I mean, we talk a lot about race, and we must, because ultimately that's where we fight. But there, beneath the race thing, this social class issue, gender issue of generation, and so on. So if you're interested, please contact me. You have the last word.
Okay. I'm sorry to disappoint the youth, but I've been doing that for many decades because I've heard over and over that the Guyanese young people, they're going to vote differently, and I have lived to see they just repeat the same behavior of the parents. I do believe at some point it will change, but I want to disappoint him in the sense that if he believes that he will wake up tomorrow and there are going to be some automatic reasonableness among the political forces, and we will sit down at a table as civilized, okay, and to trash out these matters. Anybody who believes that will be living in a fairy tale world. The truth of the matter is that the amount of money that we're talking about that oils put in the equation, it gives each side 1,000,001 more reason, okay, to fight, to want to control that. And I'm convinced that unless the political struggle reach a point where we watch each other in our faces and say, look, if we don't turn back, we're going down doom's road. It is that logic, to my mind, that will lead to reasonableness. And to reach that logic, you got to reach it through struggle. The Guyanese communities, you see, whether we like it or not, the PPP and the PNC has, whether they like it or not, have been able to maneuver the situation in Guyana to a point short doomsday. And to the extent that they're able to do that, okay, they prevail. But I'm convinced that oil have taken out of the equation control from them. And I believe that once we begin to fight, okay, for renovation of governance and fair play, a point in time going to reach where parties and political leaders, the entire country, will have to say, are we going down doomsday, or are we going to once and for all enter into historic compromise? And I don't see it happening no other way. I don't think Big Brother would feel, that he could force that down our throats. And in many respects, we shouldn't accept that, even if we try. Because any lasting solution has to come out of the Guyanese society and Guyanese realization that, we want to go down doomsday, and therefore we have to engage into historical reconciliation. And it's not going to come simply by struggle. Let's close the path to certain kinds of behavior that will get you there.
The Kumogun say of the Working People's Alliance, Cathy Hughes of Alliance for Change, and Elson Love, the People's National Congress, giving us their take tonight on the USAID report, but using that report to speak to a number of critical issues that face our country. I've been energized, and I am sure from the comments I'm reading that you have also been energized. Struggle, as Brother Ogun says, it's not a one-day thing, a one-week thing, a one-month thing. It's something that goes on. And we have to have very sharp eyes to recognize when we are scoring small victories. Turn those small victories into nourishment for the larger victory of putting together a country that we all can tenant together in harmony. Sister, brothers, good night. And thank you all for coming on. Tomorrow night, we're going to do Burnham at 99. Burnham would have been 99 years old this week. And we're going to have the Burnham people coming on. Yes, here it is, Hamilton Green, the old schooler. Vincent Alexander, chairman of the Burnham Foundation, and young Dwayne Benjamin, a young lecturer at the University of Guyana, has agreed to come on. I'm so excited that a young man is going to come on. So tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about Burnham. I want to thank you all so much. This, of course, is Politics 101. It's not a zone for party propaganda, even when we bring party people on. It's a zone where we can mobilize, where we can talk to each other, even though we may differ ideologically and otherwise, where we can talk to each other towards a common end. Good night. See you all tomorrow.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.